Large open worlds, whether handcrafted or generated by a computer, can be really fun to explore. But giving the player so much freedom can also sometimes create interesting design challenges. Specifically, handling difficulty and progression is not as straightforward as it seems. To put it simply, when designing a level or area in a linear game, you know how strong the player is and what challenges they've already overcome. But the same isn't always true in an open world game. If you design an area around late game players, the game may be frustratingly hard early on. Conversely, an area designed for newer players may be boring to players that are further along in the game. In this video, we will be looking at Breath of the Wild, Terraria, and Minecraft to see how different games approach this problem. This is Preserved Moment, and today we will be looking at the open world difficulty problem. Perhaps the most obvious solution is enemy scaling, or leveling. In Breath of the Wild, the enemies get stronger as Link kills more of them, ensuring that they don't become too weak as the game progresses. Breath of the Wild is also an example of how to level the playing field by making the player weaker instead of making the enemies stronger. Thunderstorms prevent players from using metal gear, which sometimes makes enemy encounters more challenging. And, controversially, the weapons in Breath of the Wild break really quickly, preventing the player from getting too strong. Even healing yourself could be difficult if you aren't careful with food. Finally, by no means is the map design of Breath of the Wild accidental. Different areas of the map have different environmental effects, and enemies that keep the player on their toes. You may have to sacrifice some defense to wear armor that protects you from the heat or cold, or even disguise yourself in different clothes to enter a city that, like your little sister's room, has a no boys policy. Enemy scaling and clever map design are only pieces of the puzzle, however. Because Terraria uses witchcraft to turn numbers into worlds, they can't perfect the details of every area in the same way other games can. And, although Terraria does strengthen their enemies after you beat the wall of flesh, the developers had other tricks up their sleeves as well. Namely, Terraria cleverly separates the most difficult areas from the surface where the player lives. Early in the game, you are totally unprepared to defend yourself against the creatures that inhabit the literal depths of hell. If they existed anywhere near the surface, you would be absolutely destroyed. If you want to get stronger, you merely need to begin exploring the caves that fill the underground. But as you get better gear, you can start going even deeper to find even better materials. This continues until eventually you're ready to battle the monsters of the underworld. Beyond the soft separation of some areas of the underground, the player is also literally prevented from entering certain areas until they've beaten certain bosses. You cannot enter the dungeon or the jungle temple until you beat Skeletron and Plantera, respectively. This ensures that new players don't stumble into these areas and get crushed by enemies they aren't ready to fight. It also gives players that find it early a hint of what comes later on. It's important to note that both of these games have a somewhat clear end goal in mind. In Breath of the Wild, your goal is to defeat Ganon. And in Terraria, although the game never tells you need to beat the Moon Lord, you will quickly run out of things to do if you don't beat the bosses you're supposed to fight. Minecraft, however, is way more open-ended in comparison. Although killing the Ender Dragon could be considered beating the game, many people continue playing long after they beat the Ender Dragon, and some people don't bother to fight her at all. When some people play survival Minecraft, all they want to do is build and gather materials with their friends. All of this meant that it was really important that Mojang didn't force increasing difficulty on the player. On your first day, you weren't really prepared to defend yourself against all the mobs. Once you get better gear, however, the monsters in the overworld will probably never be a threat to you again. Instead, you can challenge yourself, first maybe by exploring the dark, mob-filled caves. Eventually, however, the only way to find a challenge is to literally enter another dimension. Even in the Nether, some of the areas are safe in comparison to the dangerous fortresses and bastions. And if you want to fight the final boss, you can only get the needed materials by fighting a creature that isn't even hostile unless you anger it. Thus, a lot of the hardest things you can do in Minecraft are things that you have to decide to do, instead of being forced to do. Unfortunately, Minecraft is maybe even an example of a game that goes too far. The first few days might be a little challenging, but once you get enchanted diamond gear, there's little that can hurt you, and netherite makes you godlike. If you prepare at all before fighting the Ender Dragon, it's not even a difficult fight. Even if you want a challenging enemy, it will be hard to find one given that no bosses have been added to Minecraft since the Wither was over 10 years ago. To be fair, woodland mansions and raids do offer some challenges. Furthermore, Minecraft was never really supposed to be a combat game. But it's fair to say that if you're looking for interesting combat, vanilla Minecraft probably isn't the right game for you. Finally, the most interesting way to deal with this problem is to not look at it as one. There's something inherently satisfying about running into a boss or area that is just too difficult, only to come back later with enough strength and skill to beat it. Even in the first game we talked about, Breath of the Wild, there are areas that are difficult early on. The first time I encountered a Lionel or a Guardian, I was obliterated like the moron that I am. But by the end of the game, I was actually able to hold my own against them. Furthermore, after you obtain the paraglider, there's nothing stopping you from running straight to Hyrule Castle, killing Ganon, and winning the game. But most new players who try this will die. Thus, you can spend as much time as you want getting new weapons, abilities, and allies to help you fight Ganon when you're ready. Thus, there's a perfect balance between the freedom to do what you want and clever game design that guides you where you are supposed to be. In the end, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to any game design challenge. However, Breath of the Wild, Terraria, and Minecraft all show us some of the interesting ways developers have made good open-world games. Breath of the Wild uses enemy scaling and interesting map design to create a really fun experience. Because Minecraft and Terraria worlds aren't designed by hand, they approach the problem differently, and both end up separating some of the most difficult challenges from other parts of the world. Finally, allowing the player to sometimes be unprepared for certain areas isn't always a bad thing, because it can be satisfying to beat something that you couldn't beat previously. There are a lot of open world games out there, so I wouldn't be surprised if I missed something in this video. If you have any interesting thoughts of your own, or just think I said something stupid, feel free to talk about it below. Anyway, this has been Preserved Moment, and I will see you next time.